Hi, this is Angela G from No Longer Lukewarm for Red Hot Christians and Wannabes. These videos are for those of you who like to listen while you're maybe doing something else. For those of you who like to read my blogs, you can find that link in the description box below. So this one is called Our Labor is Not in Vain. God's kingdom is not like a vending machine. You can't just put your labor in and expect a guaranteed and immediate return. In fact, lots of times the work we do for God will look like it's going unnoticed by everybody, including God himself. We keep praying, we keep posting messages that encourage and exhort, we keep doing our ministries, and we keep living lives of faith to show those we encounter that Jesus is real and working in our lives. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try and how much we work, nothing seems to change. Galatians 6:9 is there for a reason. And this week I was fighting that weary feeling. As often is the case, that was right when the Lord showed up with a picture of the whole scenario to put things into perspective. It was a scene from the series I've been watching on a streaming service called I Shouldn't Be Alive, and it showed me clearly that my labor is not in vain in the Lord. This series, I Shouldn't Be Alive. My husband and I like to watch one show together while we eat dinner. We try to pick shows that won't have bad language or storylines or the usual political agenda, but will instead lead us to conversation. We started watching this one recently. It's a show that reenacts scenarios in which people went through terrible ordeals but came out alive. There are plane crashes in the mountains, skydiving accidents, blizzards, shipwrecks, and people lost in the jungle or in the desert. The show switches between actors showing what happened and the actual survivors themselves, explaining how they felt and what they thought about while it was happening. As we watch, my husband and I like to talk about what the people could have or should have done in each situation and how to be prepared in the various scenarios. I also like to see how real people treat God in life-threatening situations. Some pray fervently, some never mention God one time, and some curse God to his face. Sadly, the show itself never gives God credit for a single save. One time a man said, "We prayed all night," and the next word out of the narrator's mouth were, "And as luck would have it, the next day a ship happened by." The scenario in question. The scenario that really spoke to me was on an episode from season 4 called Shipwrecked Family. It was about a family of 5 that was sailing in the South Pacific. Everything was great until their boat hit a rocky reef and started to sink. When the waves and wind started crashing against the ship that was now stuck on the reef, the mast cracked and fell directly on the father, pinning him by the leg. The mother and teenage son pulled and pulled at that mast, but it weighed some 2,000 pounds. No matter how much energy they expended, they just couldn't move it. With the ship slowly submerging and all the lights going out, the son moved the mother and 2 younger sisters to a stable group of rocks nearby. After a little time passed, however, the 16-year-old boy just couldn't give up on his father. He and his mother walked back to the ship over the spiky foot-slicing reef one more time to try to get the father out from under the mast and onto the flotation device. Again, the boy and his mother pulled and pulled, but this time a wave came by and lifted the mast enough so they could guide it away from the father's leg. He then was able to go free. They pulled him onto the inflatable raft and over to the rocks where the 2 little girls were waiting with the homing beacon. That's where the rescue boat found them not long after that. My labor for the Lord. The Lord has had me fasting for my church recently. He called it a ministry and even gave me the schedule to follow and inspired my list of specific points to pray. Those points involve prayers for spiritual breakthrough, guidance, salvation for lost loved ones, healing, and deliverance, among other things. This past Wednesday night, by the time I got to church for that week alone, I had already replaced 7 meals with those prayers. That very day, in fact, I had prayed fervently 3 separate times. I had my whole heart in it and was doing all I knew to do to follow the Lord's leading. I was looking forward to church, especially to see if this was the week that God would remember my sacrifice and answer my prayers. This is no credit to me whatsoever. It wasn't my idea, and my new lifestyle has been a big adjustment. God has helped me with my attitude and moved me from grim obedience to wholehearted prayers, but He still has a work to do in me. That night as I watched in hope, the pastor looked out at the congregation, mentioned again the great needs of our church, and asked if the people of our church would please begin to pray. My heart sank. After all my sacrifice, all my obedience, and all my prayers, the need was still there without even the edge knocked off. what was going on. I knew I was doing what God called me to do, and I was using all my heart and strength to do it. Was all my labor in vain? My labor is not in vain. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Then I thought back to that shipwreck scenario. Lifting that 2,000-pound mast was impossible for that mother and son. They can pull until they physically hurt themselves, but it wouldn't make a difference. That is, until the wave came along. Then all they had to do was use their hands to guide the mast a little higher so the father could pull out his leg. But what if they had stayed on the rocks? What if the wave had rolled up when they weren't there to guide the mast? The man could have stayed trapped and sunk under the waves. Likewise, the work of the Lord is impossible apart from his hand. All our sacrifice and hard work mean nothing if it isn't in God's timing with God's power. But that doesn't mean our labor is in vain. That just means it's up to us to stay in position and wait for the wave. Occupy until he comes. God chooses to work through his people, and it's a fact that he expects us to work. In the parable in Luke 19, Jesus tells the story of the 10 servants who were each given 10 pounds and told to occupy until their master returned. It's a clear message that the people of God are responsible to him for our time and resources on earth. We are to occupy, to work toward his goals and purposes until he comes again or calls us home. But we can't always judge the results of our labor by what we see. Sometimes the effects will be clear and immediate. Sometimes we may not understand what God is doing at all. But the Bible tells us that our labor is not in vain. We just have to stay in his will, keep the faith, and watch and wait for God to move.